Welcome back. It looks like there is a recorded video that is up on Twitch, which means that I was streaming, which is great. One of these days, I will invest in a desktop computer that can handle both OBS and Firefox open at the same time. And that way that if there is a chat one day in the future, I will be able to chat with you. Although probably not while I'm reading. Although maybe, I don't know, I could interrupt myself. Anyway, the last chapter I'll read to you today from Darkbreakers, Chapter 2, is The Maid, the Moon. This is Chapter 2 of The Breaker Queen, the first novella in Darkbreakers, the collection. Chapter 2, The Maid, the Moon. Breaker House had many branching corridors, many openings into halls with still more doors. I'll try that again. I need to do that again. Chapter 2, The Maid, the Moon. Breaker House had many branching corridors, many doors opening into halls with still more doors. Eliot, whose reluctance to attend yet another of Miss Desdemona Mannering's formal dinners, especially with Gideon in this dangerous mood, was more slow-footed than usual, and soon lost his way. He bumbled into the billiard room first. It was dominated by a green felted table the size of his entire efficiency apartment, and a monstrously carved mantel clock depicting a scene from The Sacrifice of the Hunter God. From there he made his way into the morning room, all done up in ivory brocade, ivory velvet, and enough ivory knickknacks that the pale place seemed more a mausoleum for doomed elephants than a cozy gathering chamber. He found the music room after that, stuffed to the rafters with a gilded harmonium, the grandest of all grand pianos, a concert harp, and several delicate couches that would collapse under Eliot's weight. And eventually he found the library and a maid. "I am so glad to see you." The maid looked up sharply as Eliot blurted the words. He stopped and blushed in confusion. His first thought was that the wine she was pouring out from her dark bottle had somehow spilled up into his cheeks instead of down into the cut crystal decanter. But no, it splashed onto the glass-topped table and began to spread, to drip. His second thought was her face. Only that. He blinked, bewildered. He could not summon a third thought. He felt like he did on those rare, sultry afternoons when, after succumbing to a nap, he woke to the fullness of night, momentarily confusing moonlight for day. She was like that. Just like that. A moontime thing come down from the sky to stand before him. Her flashing eyes assessed him with brief ferocity. Whatever she saw made her lips curve slightly. She glanced at the spilled wine. Her little finger drew a symbol in the burgundy puddle. For a moment Eliot thought the symbol glowed, shimmering on the surface of the spill. "I think," said the maid, "that I am glad to see you too." Her voice was deep. It was the color of Eliot's smoking jacket, the color of spilled wine, blue velvet wine and wine dark brine and a horn blowing far out at sea. Immediately, Eliot felt his feet double in size, his tongue swell up like a pustule, and sweat spring from his pores. If she spoke again, he was afraid he would burst into a rash of pimples like a newly fledged teenager. "Sorry," he said, apologizing for everything, for himself and the state he was in. The maid's pinky finger drew another symbol in the wine, another flashing rune floating like a beacon on a red lake. Then she lifted her hand to her lips and licked a drop of wine from the tip of her talon. No, not her talon, her nail. Eliot squinted, his eyes awash in wine, in moonlight, in the rake of raptor claws and the blood they left in their wake. A renewed blush scorched him for his fancy. "Sorry," he stammered again. The maid gestured to the tremulous wine at the table's edge. "We have made a mess, you and I." "My fault. Eliot lunged across the room, tripped on a deep pile Damarashian carpet, and righted himself. "The spill. I startled you." "You did startle me." She met his flustered gaze again, raising her hand like a mother soothing a fretting child. The anxiety in Eliot's chest eased. She patted the air between them, and he felt the air move like a butterfly, nuzzling his chest. His hand moved over his heart to cup the sensation closer. I thought I knew this house, the maid mused, staring down at the spill. I thought I knew its ways, its walls, its updrafts and echoes, its... Her eyes scanned him again. Denizens. But obviously I have not been thorough in my investigations. Straightening his shoulders and trying not to loosen his collar, Elliot approached the table more slowly. He bowed to her, wondering why this felt so much like asking for permission. But when she gave it, with an amused nod, he leaned over and sopped up the spilled wine with the sleeve of his jacket. The maid drew back to watch him, eyebrows quirked, eyes kind. There. Elliot unbent from his labors. Now, no one need ever know about our mess. They'll smell wine on me and think I've indulged in an aperitif or 5. No one will even be surprised. Not, he added hastily, that I indulge like that. Not often, anyway. She reached out and laid a hand on his wine-wet arm. He could feel her talons, blue-black, sharp as sickles, right through the sodden fabric. That touch, some kind of benison, some rare thing, as if out on the lonely shores of a less inhabited island than Seafall, White Raven Island, perhaps, Elliot had stumbled by chance on a she-wolf who deigned to approach him, to sniff politely at his knuckles before trotting away. He did not dare breathe. Boy, she said, staring up into his lumbering boorishness, his enormous awkwardness, his shabby gigantic Elliotness, and smiling, like what she saw pleased her. Your sacrifice will not go uncounted. And then she released him. So a falconer might feel when the falcon releases him, when she launches herself up and away from him and wheels off into the welkin, disappearing into the dizzy blue. How bereft and doubtful must she leave that lonely falconer? How willing he must be to wait forever in the shade of the sleek oak tree, searching for that speck in the sky, asking himself one and only one question over and over again. Will she ever return? Perhaps if he kept talking, his voice would keep her tethered to his side. Perhaps if he never blinked, never tore his gaze from her face, she would consent to look at him once more. He would make himself easy company, a welcome perch, a friendly shrub, shelter, and then she would stay. But Elliot loved a wild thing and took courage from their freedom. So he shrugged his plowman's shoulders, far better suited for farm labor than the delicate work of paintbrush and education, and laughed, if nervously. It's nothing. No sacrifice. I mean, I bought this jacket for $1 at the flea market out back of the university. Antique, don't you think? Smelled awful, too, at first. Mothballs, mildew, you name it, but I'd fallen in love with the color, you see? I'd only encountered it in nature or in my favorite paintings, never in clothing. Plus it fit, which is almost a miracle for my size. So I bought it. Stank up my apartment for a week. Even Anna said she wouldn't drop by again until I got rid of it. But I wrote to my mother for advice, and she told me to hang it outside my window for as many sunny days as Seafall can provide. And it worked. The maid bestowed on him another of her approving smiles. I had wondered at your scent, man of Aeth. Now I know. You smell of sunshine and sea salt. But you are dressed in the colors of the Valwoed sky, and this pleases me, as few things do on this or any side of the veil. How useful you have been to me, and so swiftly upon my arrival. I had forgotten, you see, she confided, what it was to love our sky. Too long has it been since the warp and weft of it have imparted any joy to me. When next I dream the sky into being, it shall be just this blissful blue. Her gaze caressed his smoking jacket, her nostrils flaring in a mighty inhalation. Just this smell, she continued, of spilt wine and sea salt and sunlight. Elliot quickly sketched her in his mind, the curve of her cheekbone, the tip of her nose, the line of her chin. But the sketch twisted and shifted even as he imagined it. He could not keep the imaginary lines of her face straight. From woman to fawn, she changed. From fawn to lioness, to hare, to mare, to wolf. Wild, wary. Suddenly, his invisible sketch resolved itself. It settled like a net over the woman before him, and he saw both images at once. How she seemed, and how he would portray her in one of his paintings. Like an eerie wife out of some old gentry tale, she seemed a combination of both woman and beast, with long, sensitive ears and a wide-bridged nose. She wore her black and white uniform, but a crown of antler horns burst from her brow like a tower of thorns. She was tiny, but also somehow bristlingly immense. Her hair was hidden beneath her mop cap, but her eyebrows and eyelashes were a dark, sparkling blue, like her eyes. Blue? No, Elliot amended, black, so very dark and shining, or blue-black and speckled, iridescent grackle eyes, startling eyes. His thoughts wheeled off in a kaleidoscope tumble of black-winged, blue-sparked birds. Might she be a bird in woman's shape? He wouldn't put that or anything past her. Then he gasped, for she had taken his sodden cuff between her fingers and was rubbing the wet nap. Elliot knew then what a kitten felt like when his mother caught him by the nape of his neck. He knew also why the warmongers of olden Damarash had capitulated the moment their mates took their pricks in gauntleted fists, demanding an end to their endless wars. He would have given her anything she asked. So when she asked, patiently, for his name, he replied, Elliot Howell, hearing his own breathless voice from a distorted distance as though someone else were shouting the words down his throat. My friends call me Howell. I mean, Anna calls me Elliot, but Gideon calls me Howell. Chaz calls me Professor, but he's not a close friend. The maid's head tilted. Her blue-black, black-blue, shiny dark, all deep, no white eyes stared up at him. Professor, she repeated, and what, pray, do you profess? It was as if Elliot stood once more before his master's committee defending his thesis. Against illusion, the new voluptuist vanguard. Since classical illusionism still held strongholds in every academy, conservatory, and college in southern Larissa and the Federation Islands, and the voluptuists were still considered no better than an upstart group of raggle-taggle street artists, his defense was hotly contested. He had barely escaped with his degree. He began to stammer. Painting. I'm a painter. I teach some classes. Chaz has been threatening to audit one of my semesters. Chaz has been threatening to audit one of my seminars, which is why he calls me... Anyway, I don't know why he wants to. He knows more about art history than I do. His mother's the dean of Besant College of Fine Arts, although I suppose on a technical level he could always use some... Elliot trailed off, aware he was babbling. But the maid was still looking at him, still expecting him to explain himself. So he babbled forth again, praying that what he said was making any kind of sense at all. My real career, that is my art career, really took off after I graduated from art school. Not at once, not at first. Mostly I was just making do, working odd jobs. Anything to pay rent, pay off my school debt. Manual labor, same as back home. House painting, roof repair, that kind of thing. But on my days off, I'd go and sit on the sidewalks in downtown Seafall, paint tourists for cash. If there were no tourists, I'd just paint whatever I felt like. Fanciful stuff, gentry tale, nonsense. What a few of us have been calling voluptuist art. And then I got a commission, he said simply, and everything changed. Everything changed, he did not say 8 months ago. That was the day Miss Desdemona Mannering stopped on the sidewalk to watch him work. When he'd finished, she declared, I adore your art, which made him jump out of his skin since he hadn't known she was there. And then she'd asked him if she could commission a portrait from him, of herself, for her birthday later that year. And by the way, would he come to her party and unveil it there, at this little gathering she would be throwing for a few hundred of her closest high society friends, which more or less brought him here to this moment. Of course, in the interim months, he had learned that Desdemona Mannering was Gideon's cousin, and then he'd met Chas Mallister, too, and had begun to realize how influential these two apparent flibberty-gibbets might be to his career, which made him wary, a wariness that made him even slower and more painstaking at his work. A painter. The maid's face lit with a smile. For the first time, Eliot understood what beaming really meant. She has a mouth made of moonlight, he thought, dazed. I shall paint her, and call my painting Woman with the Moon in Her Mouth. She seized both his arms and crushed them in her grip, and spoke as if answering his thought. Yes, you shall paint me. You must. I dream the Valwode, but you shall dream the dreamer. You, Eliot Howell. Then reaching up with her small brown hands, each finger tipped with those tiny, sharp, blue-black talons, she cupped his face. Eliot thought that if he died right there, he would die happy. Midnight is the breaking hour, she told him, in her solemn voice that was like a fault line opening along the seafloor. When the walls become doors, any door will do. Find me then. Follow me down. Eliot avidly studied her features, memorizing them. Now he noticed the inky marks, tattoos, scattered across her cheeks like freckles, the sight of them like calligraphy, like hieroglyphics, like bird beaks and bird bones and fangs and claws and crescent moons and stars like nothing he'd ever seen before, shocked him to his belly. His hands flew up to cradle hers against his skin, but she slipped from his grasp. Quickly as a spinning top, she turned her back on him and stepped to the far side of the table, where she finished refilling the cut crystal decanter from her dark bottle. It was as if the whole interlude had never happened. Eliot clutched his wet sleeve to remind himself that it had. He could no longer see her face. Not her strange eyes, her blue winging eyebrows, her markings. All he saw was a white cap, a white apron over a black dress, a slender brown neck. The dining room is just through there, Mr. Howell, said the maid, in a voice so squeaky meek he could hardly believe the same woman spoke. Miss Mannering and the others have congregated in the drawing room, but they should all be coming along shortly. Should you like to precede them? There. Thank you. Eliot found himself at the door without remembering how or when he had moved there. He paused at the threshold, but did not turn to look at her. He did not think he could bear it. What if he had imagined the whole exchange? But he hadn't had a hallucination so strong since he was a child, since the day his mother put a paintbrush in his hands and told him to paint what he saw, all those shadowy creatures and mysterious figures no one else seemed to see, but whom he called his friends. Fix 'em right here, El, smiling anxiously, bopping his nose. Put 'em down where they'll stay. Less dangerous that way. With his back to her, his sweaty hand slippery on the door handle, Eliot asked softly, "And what is your name, miss?" "Nixie, sir." Eliot could practically hear the bobbing curtsy in her intonation. "That's what they call me here at Breaker House, Nixie. At your service, sir." His breath escaped him, almost a sob. He shut the door behind him. Okay. That's the end of Chapter 2 of Darkbreakers, the first novella, The Breaker Queen. Darkbreakers is published by Mythic Delirium. I think it can be found wherever books are bought. But you could buy directly from Mythic Delirium at their website. It's beautifully illustrated by Brett Massey. I have so much fun. I have so much fun writing it over the many years that these stories were written. Chronologically, there is a novella that takes place right in the middle of Darkbreakers. You can read Darkbreakers without reading that novella, and you can read that novella, I think, without reading Darkbreakers. But if you do read them together, you get more of the characters. They all kind of know each other, and each novella or short story, different characters that you've met before are now the main characters, and they interact in different ways. But that novella, that standalone novella, is called Desdemona and the Deep, and that was published by Tor.com, which is now Reactor. And so that was published in 2019. And I wear these ears and these horns in celebration of the Gentry World, the Volwold, Breakers, Dark Breakers, Breakers Beyond. You'll meet all of those places and all sorts of creatures in the chapters to come. This is CSE Cooney here at the Phoenix Quill Tavern, our cozy meeting place for fantasy, science fiction, and horror. Next Tuesday at 11 a.m. I will read to you the next 2 chapters. And in the meantime, keep an eye on the schedule. I will be posting events as they occur to me. Some of them won't be recurring like on the same day, but there'll be special events with authors who have new books out this year, or actual plays. My husband and I are game designers, and we've designed a game called Negocios Infernales. It's the tagline is "The Spanish Inquisition Interrupted by Aliens," and we do a lot of different literary salons. We have artists, authors, poets, playwrights. We give them prompts. We set a time where everybody writes and that everybody shares. So we're hoping to use this space for that as well. And hopefully I will get to the point where I can both be streaming and looking at the chat at the same time. That is my goal. Unfortunately, Firefox and OBS aren't working at the same time right now. So I'm only hoping that this has gone smoothly on your end. CSE Cooney out. See you next week. Thank you so much. Take care.